Morning, folks.
Hello.
How's everyone doing this fine summer morning? Bruce says good. Hopefully, it's not too hot to speak, and that's why you just use an emoji. It's warm here in my corner of the world for the next couple days. We are a chatty bunch this morning. Give everyone another minute or so, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
And here, I just thought it was my end that everyone was quiet.
All right, it's about that time. Let me find the record button. Oh, apparently I never stopped or paused it. That's fine. Welcome, everyone. I apologize for those of you that are listening for the 5 minutes of blank space we just had. But welcome to the Aries July 10th, 2024 working group call. This is Hyperledger call, and so the code of conduct and the antitrust policy are in effect. The agenda link is in the meeting chat, also available on the Hyperledger wiki. Um, you're welcome to add yourself to the attendees list or make any of the changes that are useful to the community. Don't worry if you don't see it updating on my screen. Your changes will still be saved after you hit the save button. It'll just get merged with any edits that we have here during the meeting. Anyone new or would like to reintroduce themselves to our group today? I am glad that you're all here. Any announcements we should have on our list but don't? And any release status or work updates? Stephen is not here. Colton, did we talk about the Akapai merge of the DIDCOM v2 initial work yet?
I remember us talking a bit about it in the DIDCOM users group, but I don't remember if we talked about it last meeting or not.
I don't think we have. Will you give us another? Will you re-announce that?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, so inside of Akapai, an experimental version of or experimental implementation of DIDCOM v2 support has been implemented at this point in time. If you enable it with a experimental flag, what will happen is Akapai will accept and listen to DIDCOM v2 messages and respond to all of them with error reports, basically saying that, hey, I have no idea how to handle your message. But this support, this initial support allows us to start adding in things piecemeal instead of waiting for a big PR.
So it adds support for DIDCOM v2, but no actual DIDCOM v2 protocols. Did I read that correctly?
Exactly.
And it's enabled with a flag, so it's not on by default.
Yep.
Cool. That's a good step forward because now it allows for the implementation of individual protocols stepping forward, which is awesome. But it handles all of the internal refactoring I think necessary within Akapai to make that happen. So that is very cool for DIDCOM v2 adoption. Any other work updates that we want to share with the group?
I do want to amend a little bit of what you said there, where you're talking about how it handles all of the internal refactoring. Not all of it has been done because there's no linkage to actual protocols since none of them are implemented. That work still needs to be done. So it's not like we just add protocols on top. We actually need to add the protocol routing on top as well.
Okay, so more to be done there, but an initial step. Okay,
Yes.
thanks for the correction. Cool. All right. On our agenda today, I have two main initial items, and then I'd like to follow up on some of the other stuff that we have going on. Stephen is not with us today. He had some family duties that he had to take care of, and so he may be dialing in, but not super actively today. Um, so this is what I had on the agenda. A quick follow up on the did TDW discussion, and then there's a charter review that we have as part of the decentralized trust um, change that's happening to the Hyperledger Foundation, and then some checkup on some of the ongoing things that we have. It's been a little while since we've checked it up on. Any adjustments, changes, additions, removals to the agenda before we get going? All right. Um, So Stephen gave us last week an excellent overview of did TDW and answered some questions. Um, we didn't have a ton of time for discussion. There was questions a little bit throughout, but we didn't really have time at the end. And so I wanted to um, open the floor a little bit for that. As part of that, I wanted to highlight that we have we generated some traffic on the issues of the repository that this lives in inside of Trusted Web, and so there's been a whole bunch of different comments and in learning and discussion and stuff like that in order to have the method under discussion, and so this is real useful. Um, but I wanted to open up anyone that had questions or thoughts about TDW that didn't have an opportunity to bring it up or discuss it as efficiently as they'd like in our conversation last week. We are a quiet crowd this morning. Um, so the methods here, let me drop this in. Annoyingly, I'm not in charge of recordings anymore, and so I don't have direct control over the upload schedule, but I don't believe last week's meeting has been uploaded, um, which means that you can't go listen to it yet. I'm hoping that happens soon. Um, this is the rendered version of the did method. It seems to be kind of like mostly there conceptually, but lots of the issues being discussed are about formats of things or how to tie things together. So there's definitely lines into there's definitely discussions on relatively core points that have been brought up, and so um, we have um, there's good discussion and good responses happening on these topics there, which is really useful. But yeah, um, so um, yeah, that's what it is. Please holler if you have questions. I'm hoping to get that uploaded so that folks can review that last call. It was a really great overview that Stephen gave um, of the decisions being made. It has a uh, wonderful focus on simplicity and practical decisions. In order to kind of produce this, DidWeb has sort of notoriously had some security issues in a relatively painful way, and so there's been several efforts, but this is the one that is furthest along that I'm aware of, and it certainly appears to be the most practical approach to solving the issues that DidWeb has. And so that's why we bring it up. And Stephen's highly involved in that. And there's been implementations guiding the spec, so it is not uninformed, and it has been improved by by that actually happening to really good effect. So yes. Any other questions about did TDW?
I recall that he did a presentation in front of the W3C group, and he kind of invited everyone along for that. Does anyone have um, any insights onto how that went? I didn't attend myself.
I was also not able to attend. Did anyone attend that presentation to the W3C about DidWeb or did TDW? That's a good question, Colton. We should bring that up when Steven's available to be with us and ask him to see if he has any thoughts about how that went. Um, but yes, there's a handful of did methods that I think are relative. As soon as you buy into the concept of a did method, which I believe is valuable, there's a handful of semi-uncontroversial did methods, and one of them is did peer, and I believe that did web has been one, except for its weaknesses, and I think that this has a really great shot to be a really well-known alternative to that whole thing.
Yeah, where did web has been very simple to implement, but as you mentioned, there's many weaknesses, and then TDW expounds upon that and tightens things up a bunch.
Indeed. So, yeah, solves a handful of problems. One of the interesting things is that one of the reasons a ledger is useful behind a did method is it gives you a property that I call durability, and that is if the original publisher of a did, the subject of a did, you know, stops participating, either because they are not supporting technology anymore, or they go out of business, or any other number of reasons. That turns out to be problematic for validating any activity that they did while they were participating. And so um, the because you have to be able to resolve their did. If that's hosted on web infrastructure that is related to them as an institution, then that also typically vanishes. One of the features of did TDW is that you can independently verify the document even if you didn't retrieve it from its original location. The perk there is that you can encounter it in some other way, including a read-through cache, which changes the nature of durability to something that, in addition to being provided by the actual publisher of the did, can actually be added by a consumer of the did by involving that in a read-through cache that they actually have that serves a larger system. It could also be passed like peer-to-peer. So we could certainly, like via DIDCOM protocol, ask, hey, does anyone, do you know how to resolve this particular did TDW? And if someone has a cached copy of that of the associated data, the doc itself plus the log, then you can receive it from them and validate that it's like all there. And it hasn't been tampered with. And there's still some discussion items about certain points of that, but the general property I think is really useful from a durability perspective. And so did TDW enables that in cool ways, where did web does not, and there's a handful of others as well. The part of that has to do with this SCID as self-certifying identifier, um, because the 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 an identifier in the did actually is related to the initial contents itself, either a key or more robustly the did document itself or the initial one. So you can still rotate, including rotating away from all of the keys of the information in the did document, but because you have a log of doing so, um, you can validate that the current did document is still authorized by the original creators of the original one, and some other useful stuff like that. So that's pretty powerful. It also has a concept of a commitment to a pre-rotation key that shows up in the form of a hash of a new key that you haven't used yet. The reason why that a hash of a key instead of just the public key is useful is that without the public key material, post quantum attacks upon the key don't work well when all you have is a hash of it. But should you show up with the actual hash, then the document authorizes that to be the next key that you use as part of the process. So there's some nice robustness features there that aren't very difficult to implement, but give you some nice advantages in the did method, which is pretty cool. Any other thoughts, comments, questions about TDW? All right, next item is the charter review. This is a little bit of a lighter topic, but it'll come up a couple times. So last month, there was an announcement that the new LF Decentralized Trust umbrella organization will come into existence later this year. And this is really kind of a move for the Hyperledger ecosystem, in that the Hyperledger ecosystem staff will be the staff of the new LF Decentralized Trust umbrella organization, and Hyperledger will remain a brand within that organization. But but not everything underneath LF Decentralized Trust will be branded Hyperledger. And so there's a little bit of a discussion here and things that are actually happening, and some descriptions. Um, but uh, but that's what's happening here. I want to highlight that the staff is the same. I've been really pleased with our support from the Hyperledger staff themselves, and so the staff will remain the same, which is fantastic. So all of our current processes and everything else are will might have some adjustment, but it's being handled by the same people as part of that. It really doesn't impact Aries very much, except that we do have the opportunity, if we want to drop the Hyperledger name as part of the Aries brand. Um, which is something that we can discuss. There is a new charter, and that I have linked here. That is the draft of the charter that has not yet been adopted, but this charter sort of resets it underneath this new organization. There's questions I have on this that are not yet resolved. LF projects, for example, I didn't see LF decentralized trust here, so I have questions on how this actually applies here. But the charter will affects kind of what the scope of Aries actually is as part of that. And so this document here is a draft and is available for comment and discussion to tune, how it works or other things that actually happen. Um, and so that's actually happening here. One of the changes is that we have more power if we want it to sort of self-govern our projects in different or areas in different ways than have happened before. For example, it's possible for us to have our own TSC, a technical steering committee, um, just for just for Aries instead of sort of relying upon the technical steering committee at the Hyperledger level. So there's a couple things that actually happen there. I don't anticipate this affecting really our day-to-day operations, although it could if we wanted it to. And so that link is here. My reason for bringing it up is to make you aware that this is happening, um, and to invite any comment or participation from folks that would like to be involved as part of this recharting process. I will be involved, and I imagine that Stephen will be involved pretty closely in this as well, um, to to make this happen. So yeah. Any thoughts, questions, comments around either LFDT or the charter draft that I shared the link for?
So for the most part, things won't really be changing other than the fact that it's under a different or different repo, correct?
I believe the repo should stay the same. I don't know how that happens, or if the sort of the GitHub brand of Hyperledger remains the same. Um, but yeah, basically the organization is underneath changes. So rather than being a Hyperledger project, a um, Aries is a project of LFDT, Linux Foundation Digital Trust, or sorry, Decentralized Trust. D means two things in my brain. I don't know. So you'll notice, for example, that we have Hyperledger in this is the org of the actual wiki. That could, it won't move suddenly, or should not move suddenly. I would be very grumpy if it did. And so if that's well, we can keep an eye on that. That we should have ample warning of anything that's actually happening under that before that actually occurs. And so there is a possibility that domain names and some stuff will actually need to move, um, but we can figure that out. I don't really know all of those details yet as part of that process. This does cause some controversy, sort of outside of Aries, in the sense that every time there's a new organization, or in this case, it's the first time in my sort of tenure involved with digital identity stuff here, that an org has rechartered to change its scope. And so I know there are strong feelings in some particular places about it. I have less strong feelings, but I definitely am interested in helping things work together and work along. Mostly my interest is making sure that the work that people want to do still just can happen with as minimal pain as possible. So continuing to work on Aries code bases and having the discussions that we do and everything else is my highest interest in making that happen and trying to keep sort of the management of uh, institution needs or bureaucracy or whatever at a minimum so that we don't have to. It's not something that we need to focus on. So apologize for the non-answer, Jorge, about whether it'll move or not. Other thoughts, questions?
Kind of feels like a good opportunity to do some cross promotion between, because this is decentralized trust, right?
Yes.
And it just feels like it'd be a good cross promotion opportunity between the decentralized trust and the decentralized identity stuff.
Yes. I know there's some sensitivity of feelings between the two organizations as a result of the recharter. I'm involved with both of them. Um, so I don't know how that's going to fall yet. I don't think anything drastic is going to happen. But yes. Um, when
I view them as different scopes. Like decentralized identity is, at least with DIDCOM, is more about uh, the communication and the base identity, whereas a lot of the Aries stuff has been more focused around verifiable credentials.
that looks easy on a surface. It's a lot more complicated than that. Um, Mostly because both organizations are happy for projects or code bases, et cetera, to self-select into one of the organizations, and so the that makes the boundary fuzzy.
Oh, I
Um,
see. Okay.
yeah. So one of the comments from Daniela is that they've had a lot of folks talk to them about projects that need homes, and they felt like Hyperledger was not a good home, but they really didn't have another good home that they were happy about either. And usually, it's not always just sort of technical or logical. There can be political decisions why certain organizations are more acceptable in some places than others, or whatever. Um, and so and so one of the advantages of the rebrand is that it's anticipated to over a offer a larger umbrella to folks who want to who need a home for a project, but didn't feel like it was ledger related, and so and that aren't choosing one of the other options for whatever reason. And so that's part of the discussion there, and it's not hypothetical. There's like a whole bunch of, um, of both discussions and possibilities there, that the Hyperledger crew has been working with the project originators on that. So there's actually like real things driving this, not just a sort of a supposition that needs to happen. So yeah. Okay. Any other comments on the charter? One of the things that I want to do is hunt down our existing one. I did some looking, and I can't for the life of me find it. It may have existed more in the form of a wiki readme page, but that's had updates. So I want to make sure that we can kind of compare to whatever sort of documentation basis we had for Aries in the first place, um, so that we can compare and see what things we might want to adjust as part of the process and the things that we definitely don't want to adjust. So I'll be bringing that up again with other docs that we can review. And I anticipate whoever wants to be involved will help to form the document, and then it will be brought up sort of more formally with this group here for a ratification or an acceptance process, where anyone who objects to any part of it has the opportunity to object and work with us to get that fixed before it's approved by the group. Um, so um, so that'll be public and obvious in our meeting agendas and everything else if you want to make sure that you don't miss that. Cool. Any other comments? All right, next up is our community transition to move away from unqualified DIDs. I'm quite interested in hearing about any progress you're aware of. in any code bases or related things that need to occur prior to deployment. Um, in deployment, by deployment, I mean deploying the code that actually like solves the problem, takes us to step one, um, which is everyone supports did rotation in Pure 4. The reason why we have this, we had a week ago set as the target for deployment update. So I'm also curious about any deployment updates that have actually happened where there has been code deployed to handle step one, which is recognizing both did rotation and did Pure 4 as part of that process. Does anyone have any updates that they're able to share about either code updates or deployment updates for the unqualified did transition? If you work with projects and you don't know the status of these or deployments of Aries in any way, and you don't know the status of these, please look into it. Please look into where that actually is and what's actually in front of you. The goal is to move as a community and leave the proper time for folks to do that transition. The reason why we need to kind of know where we are is because when we hit step two of this process, then we're dropping support for unqualified DIDs, and those are no longer in use. Daniel, your hands up.
Yeah, sorry, I was away from the mute button. But I just wanted to give a quick update that Octopi is working on its 1.0 release, which will be the second major release of Octopi that has included support for fully qualified DIDs. It's still in we're still backwards compatible with unqualified DIDs. So we haven't gone to the next step of outright removing that or anything. But that is the second major release of Octopi that will support it. And we've been testing against Credo to great success so far. So just as a quick code update, I guess.
If you have not updated to the current major release, which is that 6, 7? I've lost track in my brain of what the current major
It's
release is.
0.12.1 is the most recent release before the up and coming 1.0 release.
Thank you. I was way off. So if you have not updated to 0.12.1, then 1.0 will be another opportunity for you to do so, and then update your deployments based on that. So thank you, Daniel, for bringing that up. Any other updates folks are able to share? All right, moving to the next one. The other transition that we have is to transition to the out-of-band protocol away from the invitation messages specific to the connections protocol. And so the need here is to similarly add support for the out-of-band invitations, and then be able to use those as part of the process. And then step two is we stop using the connection-based invitations entirely, and then we're just using the out-of-band invitation messages. Does anyone have any information about updates to make that happen? We're noting that Bifold is currently using out-of-band, but then the connections protocol that is allowed for step one, and then step two means that where you stop using the other invitations entirely. Is anyone aware? Let me ask it this way: is anyone aware of any code project or deployment that is still using connection invitations as the QR code?
So I'm personally not aware of anything, but when I was trying to just implement did exchange and for my own personal project, and I was trying out other apps, I was disheartened that for whatever reason, a lot of the apps I was trying were basically saying that the QR code was invalid when, for instance, the Holder Plus app, which is based off of Bifold, was able to read it just fine. So, and I'm kind of worried that because I don't support connections, I didn't implement that could be a reason why they were failing, or if it's some other reason.
It helps if I unmute. Do you happen to know which apps you tested that didn't actually work?
Let me check real quick.
It doesn't have to happen immediately now. The reason I just bring it up is because it would be super helpful um, to have a list of those.
So I believe I tested the Lissy wallet, Trinsic app, Doc wallet, and I'm not 100% certain on this, but maybe the Global ID app. I'll need to go ahead and retest those along with others. But I'd love to go ahead and test out various apps just to see, hey, which apps can actually read it, which ones can connect, right?
Right. Totally. So, use Lissy, Doc, Global ID, and there's one other.
Trinsic.
So it's quite possible the Trizic one will never be updated, but we can reach out and ask. And as far as Lissy and Global ID, I'm also a little unsure. I know that Richard Esplin is with Doc, and so I could reach out and check with them on this and confirm that is still the case, or what the timeline is, so that they know of our intentions to deprecate this and make it and remove support from things. Daniel's also mentioning that Akamai has officially deprecated the connections protocol, and it's present in 1.0, but won't be present for a lot longer than that.
Yeah, a disclaimer here. So I don't know for certain if these apps don't or are still using connections. All I know is that when I tried scanning the QR code, they basically came back saying it was invalid for an out of band invitation.
Okay, that's definitely something that we can work on as part of that. Very cool. I appreciate you reporting that, Colton. Any other invitation or information that folks can share about no longer using connection invitations? I shouldn't say this.
I have a dumb question related. Well, if connection protocol is going to be deprecated, will there be a need for a new interoperability profile?
That's a good question.
Does AIPv2 say that connections is a thing there?
I'm just going to look. That's exactly where I'm going.
We're on the same page then.
I think it's indirect because it references AIP version 1 as a base requirement.
AIP2 does?
Um, as as far as I can tell, but here's what I'm looking at.
Yeah. So let's look at this. Let's pull it up and inspect. I don't think it does because there's intentionally changes from them. So when you look at here, here's AIP profile version 1 in the document here. And if we go further down, and then you'll notice, for example, that this lists the, oh, hang on, I skipped past it. This lists the connection protocol under AIP1. So if we get down to AIP2 here, so there's some discussions about how to do this, and these are goals that are moved up, but not a dependency on AIP1. You can't be, well, you can be compatible with AIP1 and 2 at the same time, but you can't be, but there's no requirement that you are AIP1 compliant to be AIP2 compliant. And in AIP2, we already use data exchange as a replacement for the connections protocol, and the connections protocol is not listed as required. So I think the answer is we don't need a new AIP for dropping the connections protocol. We already have one.
Well, and you can see in the base requirements here, some of them say AIP v1 unchanged.
What this means is that so like here's minimally or changed. That means that this RFC is the version is the same one that we referenced in AIP v1. But it doesn't mean that you need to fully support all of AIP v1 to be AIP2 compliant. And so, and then the new ones are the ones that are added. So data exchange is one of those, of course, because of that. And then here's, noting, for example, the issue credential present proof moved to v2 as part of that. So there's new ones, and then there's updated ones that have been.
And the out of band was added too.
Yeah, so out of band and data exchange is present as both of those. So now, enough time has passed that AIP2 has some issues. For example, one of them is did key, and there's some other things that are happening here. And we do need, there's been discussion about a new version of an AIP, but we didn't get there mostly because we ran into the problems that we needed to update to prep for DIDCOM v2 in a meaningful way, and that's kind of what led to that discussion there. So there's still definitely work to be done. But that's a good question, Jorge, but I think we've already got it covered with AIP2.
Thank you.
Any other comments, updates about this? I think this gives us a list of folks to talk to see where they are, and that way they know the community is in fact moving away from the connection invitations. And that way, if they wish to remain compatible, they'll need to spend the time to then move and update that. Any other comments on not using connection invitations?
If you'd like, Sam, I could test some other apps and then throw them in the stock later today.
That would be super useful. One of the things you can actually do is scan the QR codes with just like a regular boring scanner app, and then that will let you inspect. You have to do a little bit of manipulation.
Yeah, I've inspected the invite and everything, and it's what I expect it to be.
Yeah, so there can be other reasons why those apps are upset about the QR code, meaning they're doing out of band, but they've done something weird or something. And so that would be kind of, if you happen to notice those, that would be really nice to know what kind of deviations there are as we're trying to solve these issues. Cool. So from DIDCOM v2 adoption, we've already heard about Akapai. Any updates about DIDCOM v2 adoption to share around the community?
A quick update on the Akapai front. That PR that we mentioned, and that's in the doc there, has been merged. Like the initial DIDCOM v2 implementation will be included in the 1.0 release of Akapai, but it'll be gated behind an experimental feature flag, and it won't actually do very much in the 1.0 release. But it's a foundation for us to continue to build off of going forward. So there's that.
Awesome. That's very helpful. Cool. Other topics that we have. I have one if no one else has some open discussion, but I do have a topic. Oh my gosh, that's loud. I apologize. Building a house next to me, they're digging holes today, and my office window is like has a front direct view of the whole process. So if you hear backhoe squealing in the background, I apologize. Okay, I do have a topic if you can handle the background noise. Is the background, do you hear that background noise? Is that just, or am I just the lucky one?
It is audible, but it's not too bad.
Okay. It's definitely going to cause me a feedback loop, Kim. I gotta figure out how to manage my background noise for the next little bit. Um, so, cool. Concept I wanted to bring up. And that is validation of scanned out-of-band invitations. So there's a variety of ways to display an out-of-band invitation. One of them, of course, is to display it on something like a screen. And I think that's relatively good because that means that whoever runs the screen probably displayed it with reasonable confidence. It's not foolproof, but it's a decent explanation. So I'm going to add printed here. Another way is to actually, of course, print a QR code, stick it on a poster or something that contains an out-of-band invitation to make some process happen. And this is an issue because it's incredibly simple to print your own updated QR code that has an out-of-band invitation for someone totally different, like say Mallory, right, for a man-in-the-middle attack, and then drop that over the top of a QR code, and to make it worse, sometimes people actually update the QR codes on something like a poster with a sticker. So you can't really tell from a QR code whether it's been a replacement poster or it's been modified, and so you can't really trust the information in a QR code. Specifically, the most dangerous thing is that the DID itself that you're invited to connect to could have entirely changed. Under discussion earlier this week, I recognized the possible utility of using the credential trust establishment or the machine readable governance spec under work at the diff as a way to validate that. And so if this is a known participant in a governance file, you could your agent could evaluate the DID present in the invitation against known participants of accepted governance, and then warn or disallow the use of a QR code that doesn't fall into that. There are in the future more advanced things that I think we could do. I think it would be really cool to have a protocol way of saying to another party, I would like you to present me a credential that proves who you are, and these are the URIs of the governance frameworks that I operate within, or that I'm willing to accept from you. And that could be a list of one to a bunch if you wanted to, governance files that would indicate which ones would be accepted, and then the other party then has the opportunity to prove who they are. That could also be useful to validate the DIDs that are part of out-of-band invitations, because even though you may not have seen them as a known participant, if they're capable of presenting a credential to you that validates according to some of the governance that you've accepted, then that would also be good evidence that the QR code has not been tampered with. Because in addition to, of course, replacing the QR code, which is easy, an attacker would have to get their DID listed in one of those governance files itself, which is a substantially harder prospect than simply printing out a sticker and sticking it over the other one. And so I wanted to sort of bring up the concept to see if anyone had any thoughts or comments about that approach, because it allows us to completely avoid the problem with a relatively straightforward approach and something that we are working towards implementing anyway, to solve the problem of scanning unknown QR codes. In order to make that happen. So that's both a short-term solution using the governance, or a longer-term approach, which of course leans on the presentation of credentials that then match and validate what's actually happening there. Any thoughts that folks have about this?
Your second thought there reminds me exactly of how SSL certificates are handled. How you have a bunch of different governing agencies who then issue credentials to any sort of website who traditionally would go ahead and pay some amount to and provide information saying that, hey, I really am PayPal, right? And then when your browser requests information, they present the certificate, and then it checks, well, was this signed by the governance or the certificate authorities in my local store? Sounds exactly like that.
It is, except for one very important architectural change, which is the mechanism exists to select your own roots of trust instead of being forced to use an existing certificate authority.
Yep.
And so the mechanism is the same, or quite similar. The important difference is that we're not in any way proposing that everyone operate against the same sort of set of certificate authorities to make that happen. But yeah, and that way, if we do this, then in order to display a QR code that people scan, they must have previously, initially anyway, they must have previously be present in a governance file, and then later on, of course, we can expand that to make it a more flexible, but with some additional features that really haven't been developed yet. Jorge, do you have a comment, question, thought?
I guess I'm on the first point. Is an out-of-band invitation expected to always include a public did?
It has to, in order to actually work.
And it can't be a peer did, right?
It can be a peer did.
Oh, it can be a peer did. So
Sure.
if it's a peer did,
the peer did would also need to be in the governance file to make that work. So peer dids are traditionally just given to one other party, right? But it is possible to actually publish a peer did. It's not advised for a handful of reasons. It makes updating them difficult, for example. So if you are infrastructure for something, then it's not advised. If you're simply using it to make connections, it's a little bit less problematic than, say, like using a peer did to represent a mediator. And so they would also need to be there. But typically, the advice for these invitations is to have it be a well-known did, and that way you can connect and sort of prove who you are with that with that party. One of the other things that may be useful, in addition to the please give me a proof, you could say prove well-known dids. This would allow you to say, hey, I'm like prove any public dids that are published somewhere, even though we're on a like a peer connection, a did. Oh, sorry, not a public did. It requires a did. You're totally right, Daniel. Out of band requires a did, but it can be a peer did as part of that process. So I did.
I mean, not to be pedantic, but it also technically doesn't require a did because you can inline a service endpoint inside of an out-of-band invitation.
And a key.
And a key, yeah.
Right. I'm sort of considering that equivalent to a did, mostly because when we get to didcom v2, that's where we land. So,
yeah, when I was reading the spec, it was basically saying that, like, hey, if you the whole did peer or public did was specifically if you wanted to do connection reuse.
Right. And so for connection reuse, which is generally a good idea, particularly for something like scanning a QR code of at like a hotel or something, you're going to want to do something like connection reuse, mostly just for convenience. Then that's going to be important to have. So that's mostly a non-issue in the sense that it needs to be a public air quote did. So allowing you to prove well-known DIDs is also another interesting thing. If I connect with my bank, and I have a connection with them, and I'm talking with them, asking them to prove other other DIDs that they own is actually really useful because it means that I have the ability to then align those proven DIDs with governance, even though we have a peer connection. And so I think that these would be both two powerful protocols to create the ability to sort of prove ownership over a separate DID than you have previously. I think would be really useful. So you're right. So I've misspoken twice. So out of band requires either a key and a service endpoint or a DID. And if you are using connection reuse, then the public DID is advised so that it can be matched as part of that process and use an existing relationship instead of creating a new one. And so in order to do this DID governance present in a governance file, it would of course also need to be a DID that was used instead of just the key and service endpoint. And so that is a good point. And as we move to DIDCOM v2, that will be the normal for all things for all the invitations because that's how it works. The out of band invitation in DIDCOM v2 doesn't allow for the service endpoint key method of doing this. It still allows for a key rotation to occur, and that can happen with a DID rotation entirely. So you can rotate away from the DID used in the invitation to something else if desired. And so that's part of that process. We have all the same technical features, but they just happen in a different way, and it's a little bit simpler according to that. So. And I think that that would be useful. Any other thoughts? We have only like 2 minutes left. Any other thoughts about validating the DIDs present in out-of-band invitations? Okay. So I'm going to keep working on this concept. I hope to have something to present, some write-up stuff of how we can do it. That may end up as documentation that ends up as part of the DIDCOM book. And in that way we can grow and improve kind of the knowledge around how to do this safely. We've talked about how to do safe printed out-of-band invitations, but I don't believe we actually have anything written up about it. And I think there's it's time to make that happen and discuss how to do so safely. Cool. We are out of time. Thanks, folks, for coming. Appreciate it, and hope your week is a great one. And we'll be back with you next week.
Thanks.